Hi, welcome to History Talks. I'm your host, Will. This is Sebastian. In this episode, we continue our series on ancient Rome, and we will be discussing the transition from the Roman Kingdom to the Roman Republic. So, Sebastian, tell me, how did the Roman Republic begin?
Well, it all begins with the fall of the Roman Kingdom. You see, the next king of Rome, the last king of Rome, was a man known as Lucius Tarquinius. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, if we want to include his epithet. However, he was most commonly known as Tarquin. Now, Tarquinius Superbus translates as Tarquinius the Proud, and there's a reason he got this epithet. Namely, instead of, waiting for an interregnum and an election by the people to gain the throne, during the reign of his predecessor, Servius Tullius, who was getting old, he stormed the Senate and basically assumed the position, giving a speech to the Senate as if he were already king, that sort of deal. So by the time Servius Tullius actually died, he basically became king, or he literally became king.
Interesting. So he had his eyes on power before it was even his time to become king.
Yeah.
And this created a reaction among the people of Rome who were not very keen on kings.
Yes, or they were declining their keenness on kings. Who, now Tarquinius, his reign was a bit of a mixed bag in some regards. For example, he did seem to show some talent for foreign policy, keeping the peace with a number of tribes. However, particularly his methods of keeping peace with some of the Latins were viewed as sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but there was a certain nativist sentiment that disliked how he kept the peace with the Latins.
Okay, so there were some people who had nativist or nationalist sentiments where they wanted to show him more loyalty to Rome, but they thought that perhaps he had foreign allegiances that were more than they wanted to see.
Yes.
Okay. And that's an ongoing conflict we see not just there, but we see that in the present day, right?
Yeah.
We could see that if you look at U.S. politics, for example, you can see that same conflict exist, right?
Yeah.
Where certain people want us to have more of a global approach to things, and some people want us to have more of a American nationalist approach.
Yeah.
So, as you were saying.
Yes. And in addition, his domestic policy was not exactly super light, and the fact that he took power by basically storming the Senate was also disliked. So, and he also realized that there was a threat of somebody else doing the same thing to him. So he created a personal bodyguard hired by him, led by a man known as Brutus. Not the Brutus you're thinking of, but still named Brutus.
Ironic, isn't it, that you have a Roman king who has a bodyguard because he fears somebody named Brutus, but not the same Brutus we're thinking of. Or not Julius Caesar's Brutus.
Yeah, or it's not that he fears Brutus, he's hired Brutus as the captain of this guard.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood there.
Yeah. However, Brutus, even as the captain of the royal bodyguard, has his own dislikes towards Tarquinius.
Oh, so maybe he did not fear Brutus, but maybe he should have.
Yes.
And we know, according to the play by William Shakespeare, the famous line "Et tu, Brute," right?
Yeah.
So he may have. So this is also a cycle that repeated more than once, where it sounds like there may have been an issue where Tarquin may have been saying "Et tu, Brute."
Yep. It's absolutely brutal.
Alright, I get it.
Yes. Alright. And, of course, the final straw comes with the rape of Lucretia. Lucretia being a woman who was raped by Tarquinius' son, Sextus Tarquinius. And he was let off with a slap on the wrist because he was the king's son.
Wow.
This was the final straw, especially after Lucretia committed suicide after the incident.
Wow, okay. Yeah, I can imagine. So the king's son is acting with impunity, committing this vile offense. So people are obviously, when somebody commits some injustice with impunity, there is always going to be somebody who wants to retaliate, and it sounds like that may have been what happened here.
Yep. And this leads to Brutus leading the assault to overthrow Tarquinius, kick him out of, out of his palace, and not just overthrow Brutus. Their goal was not just to overthrow Tarquinius and elect a new, better king. Instead, they had new ideas. The idea of perhaps something other than a monarchy, abolishing the monarchy, and forming the Roman Republic.
Wow, very interesting. And do we know, or do you know, had this experiment been tried? Because typically there was some kind of king, some kind of tribal leader, or some kind of military leader who served in a king role. And most of history leading up to this time, and much of history after this time. So do we know, were there any other examples that they looked to where they said, oh, we're going to abolish our king and come up with some alternative system? Or were they really the originators of this system?
Well, they possibly would have known about the infamous Athenian Democracy. However, no Roman writer makes mention of Athenian Democracy. So,
interesting. They don't use that sort of as their philosophical basis. Like, for example, if you look at the American Revolution, where there are all sorts of historical references, and there's clear references, calling our upper house the Senate, right? For example, calling it a republic, as we
res publica.
Exactly. So there's clear historical references and precedent that are going back throughout Western history, when or the history of Western civilization, when the founders of the American system came up with their revolution. But in Rome, there was no outside reference. And perhaps maybe that was part of their nativist sentiment. They didn't want to say, we saw what the Greeks did, we saw what the Athenians did. Perhaps they just said, we're gonna do our own thing here.
So
interesting, though, they were founded by a king. They were founded by Romulus, so they still had this. They still had this concept of Romulus as founder, yet he's still revered by the Roman people, yet they don't want to continue having kings.
And it's interesting because there's two things that there are two other angles that I thought were also interesting in relation to this concept. Because one, there was also this idea that Jupiter is the king of the sky, the gods. So there's this almost a sentiment that the men rule by republican virtues, whereas maybe the gods have this whole kingdom thing.
Okay.
And there's also if you look at broader historical trends, you see that Rome was an elective monarchy, which was actually somewhat unusual for other Mediterranean civilizations, especially
as opposed to being entirely hereditary.
However, you want to know who else had a elective monarchy is a lot of Germanic and pre-Anglo-Saxon tribes also had some tradition of elective monarchy. So it's interesting.
It was called the Wigamont. There was a name like that, but yes, I'm familiar. That's true. The Germanic tribes are doing this.
So it's an interesting trend. A lot of historians have noticed that that civilizations whose roots have some sort of elective tradition already are more likely to incorporate more elective traditions even in more civilized forms, whether that be English Parliament or the Roman Republic.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. That's a idea that's commonly associated with Germanic tribes, but this was coming out of a Mediterranean culture.
Okay. Now, Now, I want to go a bit into the structure of the Republic, which, believe it or not, was mostly oral. That's not to say they had no written laws ever whatsoever, but largely the structure of the Republic was largely unwritten down. The roles of the Senate and the executives. They were basically just developed and decided by, the people and the people in charge over what they would do.
As a sort of honor system, I would imagine, because
Yeah.
you had the Senate was comprised of the patrician class, or the aristocratic class. So
Yeah.
I imagine the sons of the patricians were raised in this culture where they have a certain system of duties and expectations of how they would serve, and perhaps that's why they didn't write down the exact rules. It was going to be self-policing, or it was going to be this honor system.
Yep. And so after 509, which is when Tarquinius is overthrown...
509 BC.
509 BC, yes. They develop a system where the executive powers of the king are split into a variety of offices.
Interesting.
Namely, the two consuls, or at first they weren't called consuls, but that name would be granted later, and the Rex Secorum. Basically, the consuls were the main executives / commanders-in-chief. There were two of them. They served a year term. They were elected by the people. Both consuls ran together on the same ticket, and they were in charge of the military. And they could veto each other's decisions.
That's very interesting. The two could veto each other's decisions. So, if the Senate wanted to veto, so if the Senate passed something, did they have to have at least one of the consuls agree with them, or did they have both consuls agree?
The Senate should have at least one consul agreeing with them, because a consul could say, "Oh, I veto this," but if the other consul says, "Oh, I'm going to veto that," then
interesting. That's quite a system, where
Yeah.
essentially it weakens the power of the executive or the commander role even more, because one can veto the other.
Yes.
And there was another role you mentioned, Rex something.
Rex Secorum.
And that was that a religious leader?
Yes.
Okay.
The name literally translates as King of the Sacrifices.
Interesting.
And he was a counterpart to the Pontifex Maximus, the head of the priests, the leader of the College of Pontiffs.
Okay, so the pontiffs, which I believe such a term like that is used by the Catholic Church, isn't it?
Yes.
The pontiff, right? So so that's quite interesting. That originated as a Roman pagan term, yet was adopted when centuries later, when Rome converted to Christianity. So you have a religious leader there who's, I'm assuming, a thought leader, or a leader of priest, and you have another religious leader who is the leader of the sacrifice, or leader of their ceremony.
Yeah,
right?
their ceremony, their ritual.
And prior to that, did you have kings who were both the executive of the government, the commander of the military, and the head of religion?
Yes.
That's interesting. And so we don't see that. I mean, for example, much later, you see King Henry VIII of England.
Yeah.
When he separates from the Pope, or somebody in this pontiff tradition, when he separates, he says, "I am going to retake command of the church," and put that in the role of the monarch. But that comes much later. But I thought it's interesting that they split it up there, and then you see things that were influenced by Roman culture centuries or even millennia later.
Yeah.
Going back to where this was. Okay, so we now the king's role. We have something like a king that has been split into multiple roles. Each has been weakened.
Yeah.
The consuls only get power for 1 year. So they really weakened it. Like during the American Revolution, we said we want to separate from the king, and we're going to put a president who has, certain powers to, appoint judges and commander of the military, and single veto power over the Congress, and is elected for 4 years. But they took it even further. They weakened the king's role much further than that.
Yes. Hence why often consuls' military skill was one of the most electable factors, since the main power they had was in leading the military, leading campaigns.
Interesting. And Rome was known for its military. In fact, that was a large part of how they grew, if not the most significant factor of how Rome grew.
Yes.
Okay.
And the powers, and the exact powers, often change, throughout history. For example, especially, power rarely moved in the direction of the consuls, especially early on, and one reason for this is a check/balance put in place, which was basically accusing people of trying to restore the monarchy.
Wow! So that was a slur in their culture to accuse somebody of wanting to be a king. That it became such a reaction to the king. So it went so far in the other direction that they said, not only are we going to weaken the role of the king in such a serious way, we're also going to be vigilant about accusing anybody that we may think wants to restore the monarchy.
Yeah.
And you said, so then the patrician class had this sort of this unwritten, or this honor system that went on. And how did that go on for? How long did it go on for? Half a century or so? And then was there pressure then that to somehow formalize or codify or write down?
Because in 451, there was a push to at least implement some more legal codification, and this leads to the 12 tablets, the 12 laws, sometimes known, though it's more accurate to describe it as these 12. Basically, there were these 12 copper tablets that were inscribed with basically a bunch of laws that, here. I have a piece of paper.
Oh, sure. Let's hear what the rules are,
where
the laws are.
The entire list is pretty long, so I've just cut out excerpts that I think pretty do a good job of showing how broad these laws, covered in terms of subject matter, and also how oddly specific they sometimes got. On Table 2, Clause 3, it says, whoever is in need of evidence, as in a court case, he shall go every third day to shout before the witness's doorway.
Wow. He shall go every third day to shout before the witness's doorway.
Yes.
Interesting. I'm curious how that was carried out. It's too bad we don't have any kind of video evidence where we could see somebody saying every third day, going and shouting at the witness's doorway. That would be interesting to see.
Or Table 5, Clause 4, which is a bit more practical, saying if a person dies without a will and has no self-successor, the nearest male kinsman shall have possession of the deceased household.
Okay, that sounds reasonable.
Yeah. In contrast, you have Table 10, Clause 4, which says, a woman must not tear her cheeks or hold a chorus of alas on account of a funeral.
Okay. Would say that again?
Must not
tear her cheeks. They're saying a woman must not cry at a funeral.
Yeah.
Wow, I wonder what the punishment for crying at a funeral is.
I don't know. It doesn't specify punishments, it just says don't do this.
I wonder what the purpose of that was.
Yeah. And then the last one I wanted to bring up was Table 11, Clause 1, which says, marriages should not take place between patricians and plebeians.
Oh, okay. Interesting. They wanted to keep their separation in place, and I'm assuming there was some patrician who their child wanted to marry down, and they said, no, we are going to put this in law. You cannot do that. We are keeping patrician blood. We're keeping the patrician families together and not allowing anyone else in. That's interesting. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it is interesting that, the patricians wanted so much to not have anything to do with the plebeians,
clearly by the marriage thing, they clearly wanted to create this clear delineation to say you cannot get into our group.
Yeah, and they made it very, very...
At least by marriage.
Yeah, and they made it very, very difficult or impossible for a plebeian family to rise to the rank of a patrician family, There wasn't...
I wonder, could it be done through military heroism or conquest, perhaps.
Perhaps that was pretty much the only way, and even then, like, they were reluctant to admit new families into their special class of only the most refined citizens of Rome who understand the best of the Republican virtues.
I see. It sounds a bit effete.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so did you have any other things you wanted to say about the transition period from the Roman kingdom to the Roman Republic?
Just one note about Tarquinius made 2 attempts to try to retake the throne, because he did not die in the coup to overthrow him. He was just exiled. The first time, he basically was contacting senators under the premise of just trying to restore his personal property, because, you know, he did hold an actual household, you know. It was under the premise of just trying to get that back, but secretly he was contacting senators and patricians with the premise of, you know, counter-coupping and restoring the monarchy. And when this was found out, you know, a lot of the people involved on Tarquinius' side were executed.
Wow.
And this was particularly harsh for Brutus because 2 of his own sons were involved in the conspiracy.
Wow, 2 of his own sons were. And so did he punish his own?
Yeah.
He punished his own sons. That was punish his own sons for this conspiracy. That must be tough as a father.
I know.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. That was a good episode, Sebastian.
And we'll see you on our next episode where we discuss the further development of the Roman Republic.